The Poet Speaks podcast is sponsored by the Poetry Lab. Poetry Lab partners attend a monthly workshop led by a teaching artist who represents a fresh new voice in the writing world. The goal, now more than ever, is to hold space for poets to write, read, and craft their learning journeys in a supportive community. And it's only $35 a month. Sign up at thepoetrylab.com/lab partners. All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to the Poet Speaks podcast. Our next guest is a second-generation Filipino-American poet and teaching artist. His catalog of work covers a wide range of material, from the seemingly mundane to the heart-wrenchingly familiar. Raised with a background in theater, improv, and hip-hop, he has been honing his poetic craft for the past 5 years and has been blessed with the opportunity to work with some amazing artistic institutions, such as Melrose Poetry Bureau, Spoken Literature Art Movement, Asian Creative Network, Los Angeles, Palms Up Academy, Get Lit Words, Ignite, the Poetry Lab, Poetry Brothel, just to name a few. His debut collection of poems is set to release this year in collaboration with the Community Literature Initiative and his publisher, the World Stage Press, alongside his first ever poetry album produced by Fictitious Professor. All right, he's done it all. He loves good quality boba and is often distracted by small to medium-sized dogs. We welcome to the podcast, Soul Stuf. Soul Stuf, how are you today?
Good, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So tell us, where are you currently at right now? Where are you currently at? What's your location? What are you up to?
Yeah, so I'm originally born and raised in upstate New York, but I live out in Los Angeles, California. I operate in the greater Los Angeles County, and I've just been performing in LA and also in adjacent counties like Orange County and Long Beach County.
Word. Wow. How's the LA scene currently right now? Pandemic and all. What is that looking like for y'all out there? Is it far reaching in terms of spoken word poetry? Y'all getting a lot of kind of open mics out there? Or is it kind of just the pandemic has shut a lot of that down?
Yeah, I think right now we're in an interesting transitional phase. It feels like stuff is opening back up slowly and tentatively. I know that this is like the first year a lot of festivals and bigger shows have started to come back. I think that the virtual space is still there. There's still online stuff going on. But I think for the most part that, yeah, there's kind of more in-person, live person programming happening again. So that's nice to see. And that's kind of why I've decided to come back and start performing more, because we're having that in-person programming again.
Absolutely. So tell us, how did you come into spoken word? Obviously, you do so much comedy, improv. What launched you into spoken word poetry? What was kind of your starting humble beginnings, if you will?
Yeah, well, I was very engaged well, I've always been involved in performance in different forms. And I still enjoy like the multifaceted aspect of live performance. But I want to say in college, when I was a part of my hip hop organization, LFS Flow, we partnered a lot in a lot of events with the spoken word group at my undergrad university. And I got to know them pretty well. I got to hear and listen to some more traditional spoken word and kind of heard a little bit about their style of performance in poetry. It's funny because they'd often say like, "Oh, Christian, you're a freestyle rapper, you're a rapper, period. Like you're also a poet." And to this day, I still hotly contest that or contend that in that rap is very adjacent to poetry, but is not like necessarily poetic. Well, it is poetic, but it's not poetry in and of itself. I think rap and poetry exist parallel, but they're separate. And so I'd always say like, "Thank you, but I'm not a poet, I don't write poetry, and I think it's really cool, and I would love to do that someday. But my focus is more on hip hop and on freestyle." And that was a big thing too for me, right? I would freestyle a lot, but I wasn't a big writer growing up, or in college at least. I was really into coming up with ideas and thoughts and stuff on the spot, but it was actually easier for me to do that than it would be to write and rehearse and perform a written poem, because to me that would be a lot more higher stakes. I would feel like that would be a lot more pressure if I had a lot more time to like craft an idea and to try to get that idea out to an audience. But with freestyle, it's all in the moment. It's all off the cuff. There's no pressure. to do or say anything profound. You can just do whatever you want, you know, and I was pretty good at that. So anyway, long story short, I'd always been interested and fascinated by poetry in college. And then towards the end of college, I remember I heard a poem by Phil K and Sarah K called When Love Arrives, um, that had been recorded in the Sydney Opera House. And it was a great poem. And I was like, oh, wow, poetry. I'd never seen poetry performed that way before. And I was like, oh, this is really moving to me, you know? And that was kind of like a seed that initially kind of sprouted an idea of like, oh, I would love to do that too, you know? And then in Los Angeles, I'd, been performing around the open mic scene for a while and just had come around to writing more material kind of privately at first, because of a past relationship. And after that relationship ended, I felt more empowered to kind of like speak on some of the things I'd learned through that relationship in the open mic space. Um, and through that, I sort of dove into poetry, and less I kind of gave hip hop a break and decided to try more writing and performing poetry. Yeah, kind of largely because of the poem that I heard from Sarah and Phil all those years ago, but then also because of the relationship, because the girl I was dating was a songwriter and a poet as well. So she kind of had a good impact on me. So yeah. And then I kind
Wow.
of just, kept going, and the rest is history.
Wow, wow, wow. It's so interesting how so many kind of accumulations of your life end up have you kind of pushed towards your path. So you and I, we talked a little bit earlier, going back to you had begun with freestyling rap. You and I had talked earlier and you had talked about a little bit about, your Filipino-American identity, being in these spaces with rap and hip hop, which are particularly Black spaces, and kind of how you adjusted into that. Talk a little bit about kind of what your identity and how that kind of, how you kind of entered into those spaces and what that experience has been or was like.
Oh, well, I guess in the realm of hip hop specifically, it's still present, definitely. Even though I'm not, like I said, I'm not someone who's really pursuing hip hop as a career, and I don't think that I'm necessarily um, the representative of Filipino hip hop, or I'm trying to be. But just from my memories in prior experiences and in prior spaces, it's interesting, right? Because I think any non-Black energy or non-Black voices in those spaces are incredibly aware of where they are, right? Like their positioning in that space. I think especially with spoken word and slam and hip hop, these are art forms that are rooted kind of in the Black experience, right? Or their origin story is very much tied to the narrative of, Black struggle. I'm not a historian. I don't necessarily know, how slam and how rap battles started, but well, I know slam started in Chicago, but that's a separate story. But anyways, I know a lot of the roots of both of those performance arts are like kind of the call and response and like different sort of songs and things that were created in like the Middle Passage. And so, anyways, sorry. To tie back to your question, I think for me it's an understanding that like, I have a lot to live up to, and I definitely feel like I need to perform better, right? Like one thing I feel like I've learned from Black spaces specifically is that, if they like you, right? And if you're good, it's great, and it's really hard to win people back in a space like that if you stumble or you fail or you're not confident. You just have to present yourself very confidently, right? Even if that means puffing yourself up a little bit more than you are. Because I think for me, I'm very much a silly and like charming kind of personality. I don't necessarily feel very combative or very aggressive most of the time, but I think that I still find a voice, and I find a position, and I find like belonging in those groups as long as I can just be very confident with who I am, right? I think that's the one thing it's hard to be in a Black space is shy or not confident, especially if you're a performer, right? So it's been an interesting learning experience for me, and I still hold that with me. And when I'm in a non-Black space, when I'm in an Asian space or white spaces or Latino spaces, I still carry a lot of that with me. And it's almost like a little tool that I use, that makes me a better performer, right? Because I think when you're put in an arena where you really have to perform your best, it just makes you that much better for any other scenario, right? So I just feel like I'm better in other spaces, or I'm just a very flexible performer because of that experience.
Interesting, interesting. So as we said before, you're Filipino, and that is a heavy part of your work. What is that upbringing and culture brought for your storytelling and writing? Your Filipino culture and heritage.
My Filipino heritage specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've been finding more of that, or rather finding my voice and how it relates to my heritage more out here. I mean, I am a Filipino-American artist in everything I do. I don't necessarily know if I'm the best, again, representative of Filipinos, because where I grew up in upstate New York, there weren't a whole lot. And I felt like I was very disconnected from my heritage growing up. Poetry has been a way for me to reconnect with that in little ways and in little bits and pieces, and learning more about my heritage and being more proud of that, right? And also, I think it's a privilege to understand where you came from at all, right? Because there's a lot of folks out there, a lot of different people. Again, not to always dial things back to the Black experience, but a lot of my like Black poetry friends and Black friends in general can't necessarily trace their roots, right? Because of colonialism and because of bullshit. So it's I think a privilege to be able to know where I came from and to be able to trace my roots very specifically, And yeah, I guess it's just there's a trend now within performance art to be a lot more loud and proud about like where you came from and what makes you different, what makes you special, right? Even though I don't feel like that was the case growing up. And so I think that I'm like trying to embody my Asian heritage without like posing or like pretending like I'm an expert, because I'm not. But then again, one thing that I've heard from another poet that I think really resonates with me is that regardless of what I do and what I write, everything I perform is a Filipino poem because I'm Filipino, right? And I think that's something that I take home with me a lot, is that even if I'm not like someone who can speak Tagalog or Visayan or any of the dialects very fluently, that doesn't make my experience any less valid. So, yeah.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful way to put it. So let's go into what I think so many people are wondering. The name Soul Stuf. How did you end up with that name? What made you come up with that moniker for yourself, Soul Stuf? How did that come about?
Well, I think I kind of took a note from like KRS-One, right? The acronym. And for me, like I wanted a name, Soul Stuf, that was both like a fun name or like a cool name, but also had a lot more resonant meaning behind it. And one thing that I don't tell a lot of people is that STUF is an acronym, right? It stands for Soul, Truth Universal, and Flow. And so that together, all those three elements, those three aspects represent what I aim to hit in my poetry every time, right? Those are the three pillars that I think are most important for me to make sure that I'm representing and representing well in my poetry. And also for when anyone asks me, oh, like, what's your poetry about? I think it'd be fun to just respond, oh, my poetry is about soul stuff. So yeah, that's where that came from.
I like that a lot. I like that a lot. Soul Stuf. It's an acronym for so much more. I really dig that. Okay, okay. So tell us, what is for you then? What have you found to be the biggest inspiration for your writing, specifically your spoken word? I've been able to see your spoken word through videos, all online. What exactly is kind of what makes you tick as a poet? What really pushes you to put that pen to paper and perform? What is the kind of main motivator behind that for you?
Well, I think it's just like I like interesting ideas. I like clever ideas. And I like, you know, freshness, I suppose, a fresh approach. For me, I feel like some people, I don't know, well, this is my judgment or my perspective, is that some people who are very performative or who are well versed in performance take a somewhat arbitrary approach to poetry, or their poems to me sound very tired or very, played out or what's the word? Cliched, right? And so for me, it's like when I do anything, my whole approach to poetry is play-based. And when I perform poetry, when I do a set, even when I just do like a small open mic set or whatever, my whole, mentality is that it's fun for me. It's therapeutic for me as well. But also, like, I like to have a good time, and I want my audience to have a good time too, right? So as long as I'm having a good time, I know that they will as well. And I know, like, I have a lot of joy and a lot of like fun and a lot of playfulness that I like to express. And so I like to channel that through my poetry. And I feel like I don't like to present anything. Well, I'm very into like experimental work, but for the most part, like, I don't like to present anything or share any poetry unless I think that what I'm sharing is something different, right? Or something novel or interesting, or just a new, more unique idea, right? If it's just another love poem or just another, racism poem, then it's like, okay, great. There's a million of those. Like, why do you, Soul Stuf, need to say this, right? Like, how is your specific thing different? Like, what is the reason you're doing this? How are you doing it differently? Um, like, what is the point, right? And for me, it's always like, well, I want to get that message out there, but I also want to like present it in an entertaining and playful and novel way, right? So I think for me, it's just like, if I have an interesting enough idea, or if there's something I think hasn't been addressed or approached in that sort of way yet, in a very public way, then that gives me enough impetus or motivation to approach that through poems.
100%. I can see where you're coming from with that. There's a way in which you want to do it that's very playful to the audience. It's like what's the phrase? Feeding people the medicine. It doesn't matter in which way you feed it to them, but you got to feed it to them some type of way to get your message across. So I like that a lot. So speaking of that, getting your message across, you've worked with so many platforms: Poetry Brothel, Wild and Out, BuzzFeed. How is it like for a poet? How have you expanded your poetry and storytelling to these huge platforms? How did you kind of even get those conversations started to put yourself on this main stage, mainstream, with these platforms like BuzzFeed, Wild and Out, Poetry Brothel?
Yeah, I guess it's well, it's a combination of good timing and good luck and having a decent skill set. I wouldn't say I've gotten as far as I have just because I'm like the best poet or like I have such amazing skills, but I think a big part of putting yourself out there and expanding your reach is being just a nice and friendly person to work with. I like try to focus really hard on having those good relationships with people. And B, just like really like hitting the ground running, um and not being afraid to just pitch yourself, and to put yourself out there. Like I said, uh a lot of folks, think that there's like a magic formula, and there isn't, right? I think that work begets more work, and I think momentum begets more momentum. And I think that I've been really lucky and had a lot of good opportunities because I've had a lot of people looking out for me, right? I've had a lot of good friends in my corner that I've met and who have been big advocates of me and helped me, find new places, right? Like Wild and Out was completely random. That was just like me doing a comedy show in Hollywood, and there happened to be a scout in the audience, and they just hit me up on Instagram later on, and they were like, "Hey, we saw your work and sent it to Viacom, and they thought it was really good. Would you be interested in a meeting?" And I was like, "Sure, whatever." And I thought it was a scam, and then I showed up, and it wasn't. And I was like, "Oh, cool." But like stuff like, yeah, like BuzzFeed, Poetry Brothel, this, that, and the other. I've just connected a lot with poetry organizations in Los Angeles and beyond. And the poetry community out here, and I'm sure in other places, is like incredibly intimate and it's small, right? Like once you've started doing shows and meeting people, it's not that hard to like find new avenues to perform your work, as long as you are focused on it and are like um, vocal about it, right? Vocal about what you want. I think that people are willing to help you as long as you're a good person and you're outspoken. So yeah, I think those are kind of the essential ingredients to getting out there. And LA is always incubating new ideas. So I think it's a good place to be if you want to get out there.
Absolutely, LA's the place to be. So I'm very curious about your experience on Wild and Out. You were a cast member for what season were you on? How did that, and tell us, we see that show on TV all the time and like everyone thinks it looks so easy, but obviously there's it's like a long scouting process to get on the show, all that stuff. Talk about your experience on Wild and Out on MTV. How was that? Were you just pinching yourself the whole time? What was that experience like?
Yeah, it was interesting for sure. I was on just for like two episodes on season 13. It was definitely a very educational, enlightening experience for me because it was out in Atlanta, and they scouted me in Hollywood. There was just, there are scouts that go out to different shows all the time, and they liked my stuff. I was a comedy freestyle show, so it was very much in the realm of what Wild and Out does, and they liked my stuff. And they were looking for like new people of color to be part of the cast, and I was a relatively unknown person at the time. I think I still am. And they put me out to Atlanta and put me up in a hotel, and I got to meet a lot of the current cast. Now, the show obviously these days I feel like has a little less renown. I think that's true though with a lot of old staple ensemble shows like Whose Line Is It Anyway? Even though it came back, it's not as popular as it was. Or Saturday Night Live, right? It's not as popular as it once was. But the show's still kicking and it's still doing stuff. And yeah, it was definitely interesting to work with a bunch of influencers, a lot of people that were more like famous than me and had a lot more followers or whatever. And yeah, I had a lot of fun playing games and sort of meeting the crew and just like doing like improv and rap games that felt very, very much up my alley. Although it felt kind of like vapid in a way, or a little shallow, in that they really wanted me to like pimp out my culture. Um, and that's something that I felt kind of like a certain type of way about. And also like just, not putting what's the word I'm looking for? Not trying to like sugarcoat it too much. I also like didn't do great on my first live episode, like in front of the audience. Like they told me the format of the show. They showed me all the games, but there's no like practice runs, right? There's no rehearsal. Like once you understand like how the show is going to work, they kind of put you in front of a live audience and they're like, go ahead, good luck. And I just remember on the day of my first episode, I was so nervous. I'd never, I mean, I'd performed plenty of times, right? And I'd done like TV stuff before, but I've never done something where like it was A, like this improvised, and B, like 100% my responsibility to perform, and to do well and to make people laugh. And so I was very much afraid, nervous. It's funny too, there was like catering and an open bar, and you could do whatever you want. You could like drink as much as you want before the show, and some people did, and I'm not judging, but I was like, oh no, like I don't know, I couldn't do this. I need to be like 100%. I need to be on top of this. But yeah, I was like the very, very, very first person to go up, and it's like a 3 hour long show that they condense into like 20 minutes, so it's like a long airing process. And I remember I was supposed to do like a rap battle, or not a rap battle, a like game, an insults game with another person, and I was like stuttering on my first word, and from there it was just all downhill. Because I mean, to my own credit, I kept trying to come back and like participate in games and stuff, but I kept not nailing it. The audience, like once they decided they didn't like me, they just didn't like me. It didn't matter what I did or what I tried, like they just were not on my side. And I trying to keep my head on my, head on my shoulders. I didn't like run away and cry or anything. I stayed up there. I like just kept going. And I was like, I'm just gonna do better, do better, do better, do better. And then that first filming process in that episode wasn't great. So I was just like, you know what, it's okay. The next episode I'll do, I'm sure I'll be better. I'm more equipped to handle this now. But then after that, I got a call from Nick's assistant, and they told me that I was flying back to LA. So it was a very short-lived time. I was out there for like, I think 2-3 weeks, but that was kind of what I was alluding to too, when I was talking about like Black audiences, right? And if they like you, right? But if they don't, they really don't. It's just really like making sure you come out with the right energy and making sure that you are confident in what you do. And I was really confident during training, during rehearsal. I was like the golden kid, I was really, really good at all the games. But I was really, really nervous when it came time to perform. So I was just like really sad about that. But realized, it wasn't really meant for me, and that freestyle and hip hop is something that's fun, but it's not necessarily something I want to focus on. So I was really happy to kind of use that as a way to realign myself more towards poetry.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That very, I mean, that very interesting, long, hard process. I know you kicked ass, but Nick's assistant just had to call you. But no, thank you so much for sharing that story. And tell us a little bit about, so kind of like going into that whole thing of, like you said, when you have to bring it, you really have to bring it, no matter what space you're in. So now, as you're looking more towards spoken word poetry, that's going to be, that's really where your heart truly is. What do you think people can really, in your opinion, just what can people truly, truly, truly take away from spoken word poetry, you think?
Well, there's a lot. I guess it depends on the person, and it depends on the poetry. I mean, it's a pretty broad realm. I mean, gosh, it's like for me thinking like, what can people take away from music? But I think it just depends on, yeah, I think it depends on what you're looking for, right? And I think part of what I do and what my part of what my process is like showing poetry in a new way, right? And just like bringing sort of a new dimension to it, right? Bringing like that play, bringing that fun, bringing that energy. I think people can take away um, similar narratives, right? I think poetry is storytelling first and foremost, but I think that it's got a lot of heart. And I think that one of the most impactful and resonant aspects of spoken word poetry is that ability to like relate to a narrative, right? A similar narrative. I think there's like a poet, there is a poet, Olivia Gatwood, who says like, we find each other in the details, right? And so, she has this beautiful TED talk about how like when you tell a story about how when you're like, a 10-year-old, a 10-year-old female identifying person wearing a bikini for the first time and all of the emotions that come with that, even I, a cisgendered Filipino-American male, can relate to that feeling of like bravery, of fear, of self-consciousness, intimidation, right? All of these aspects. And I think that like that's what poetry really is, right? It's that narrative that we connect to, regardless of where we come from, regardless of what our background is. So I think there's a lot of heart and a lot of like life lessons we can take away from poetry.
Absolutely beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I like that. I like that quote she has. Life is in, or our human interactions. Our life is in the details. There's another quote. Someone says, "The devil is in the details." So there's so many things to be found within the stitches of the intricacies of so much of what we do. So, Soul Stuf, this has been such a great interview so far. I appreciate such all these anecdotes that you've given us. I mean, so many gems that you're dropping with the stories that you're telling, and looking at a look at your a small peek into the window of how your soul works and how all your stuff is going for you. So, one last question for you. One last question. Soul Stuf, why do you need to get your words out?
That's a great question. I think, yeah, I feel really passionate about this work. I think that my philosophy with poetry is different, and how I approach it is different. Like what I want to do really, or what my aim is to find poetry, or like provide poetry a new platform, or like a higher stage than it currently has, and like producing and creating content that is new and innovative, right? And interesting, right? Like some of the ideas that I have, and stuff that I've been working on is like an improv and poetry show, right? That blends traditional long form improv with spoken word and finding a marriage between the two. Or a poetry dinner that I want to produce as well, where folks kind of have like a blindfolded dinner in like a nice, elegant, upscale atmosphere to poetry, right? Where essentially like you eat as soon as the poets perform, right? But you don't see them, you don't hear them, you don't know anything about them, because poetry, a lot of spoken word is a very visual first kind of experience. A lot of people make those quick judgments about poets just on how they look and how they sound initially. And there's those preconceptions. And so I think one thing that'd be cool is to strip that down and to bring it back to the work and the art first before everything else, right? And so I think that would be a cool idea. And I have I have an idea or multiple ideas really about how poetry can be elevated, right? And how it can be more than just like an open mic or what you read or a showcase, you know, as I've seen 1.5 million times over. But I think we're at a good point right now with, you know, some of the stuff that I've seen with America's Got Talent and Amanda Gorman doing like the presidential invocation or the inaugural address. You know, I think poets are getting more and more exposure and a higher stage. And I think that it's at a good point right now where we can continue to build that legacy and give poetry that platform, right, to become a high art. And so hopefully folks, you know, who want to be there are kids and youth that dream about being actors and dancers and singers and all of these things, right? And I think that'd be cool if there are a new generation of folks that want to be poets, you know, like I specifically want to do. You know, people ask me all the time, like, oh, you don't want to rap? You don't want to be an actor? And I'm like, no, those things are cool and I respect them, but no, I want to be a poet. And I will use all of the skills that I have acquired through doing multiple things to fuel my poetry, because that is what's most important to me. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. A beautiful answer. Yes, we all would love if this future generation dreamed of being poets. That'd be an absolute dream come true. All right, Soul Stuf. So tell us, what's 2022 looking for your writing and beyond? Tell us any events, projects that you have coming up, as well as tell us where everyone can find the link to all your amazing work.
Yeah, I mean, I've got, as of this podcast, I've got quite a few engagements in June. You know, I know a lot of my friends are enjoying Pride. I am enjoying Pride as well. Not that I necessarily have as much to say as my queer and BIPOC friends, but yeah, I'm still doing shows. Like this week, I'm in the Anaheim House of Blues, which will be fun. I'm headlining that show on the 16th of June. And then I'm also performing in San Diego for an organization called So Far Sounds from a Room. It's a really beautiful organization that's global. I'm doing a performance with them in Old Town San Diego. That's going to be super fun. I think that's actually going to be June 13th, so out of order there. And then my book is coming out along with my poetry EP this summer on August 31st. Then I'm going to be touring that around the West Coast. And then in 2023, I'll be looking to work more in like the college network and touring campuses along the West Coast or Midwest as well as a college poet performer. So yeah.
Nice. Where can we find all of your amazing work, your socials, anything you got for us?
Mostly on Instagram at Soul Stuf. That's SOULSTUF.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Soul Stuf. We've appreciated you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for being a guest on The Poet Speaks. Absolutely. All right. Prayer hands.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yes. Prayer hands and salute from him. All right. Thank you so much to Soul Stuf. Everyone, go check out Soul Stuf stuff in the YouTube section, the description box in the YouTube page of the Poet Speaks podcast. So go to the Poet Speaks podcast on YouTube. All his links and info will be in the YouTube description box. All right, everyone. All right. Big thank you to Soul Stuf. We appreciate you being on the podcast. Everyone, this is the Poet Speaks podcast. Check us out. We're the #1 spoken word poetry podcast in the world. Check us out everywhere. All right. It's the Poet Speaks podcast, and we will talk to you soon. Bye-bye, everyone.